Thatcher leaned back from the grill, wiped his hands on the apron like he was finishing a masterpiece, and said with perfect calm, "Dad, we need your savings." The ribs didn't burn that night, but something else did. My stomach clenched before the meat even hit the plate. It was April in Asheville, one of those spring Sundays where dogwood blossoms floated lazily through the breeze like confetti after a quiet celebration. Charcoal smoke curled around us in lazy wisps, while condensation from the sweet tea traced slow trails down the porch rail. A peaceful afternoon. Until it wasn't. I'd noticed the brown leather passbook that morning wedged right between How to Retire by 60 and my late wife's handwritten recipe binder. The kind of site that makes your thumb twitch without thinking. I hadn't opened it yet. Something about it felt like touching a grave. Imagine Thatcher continued, eyes locked on me like he'd rehearsed this pitch in a mirror. Weldon's Oven. Our third store just broke even last month. We're poised for expansion, but we need capital. Your capital. I studied the grill. I turned the ribs. I watched the glaze bubble and hiss. You have a loan already, don't you? Maeve reached across the table. Manicured fingers sliding a leather folder toward me. It's not a loan, really. It's an investment. A family legacy, she said with a smile. Too even for a Sunday afternoon. Lorna sipped her wine like it was cough syrup. Wouldn't it be beautiful if the family invested together? Like a generational bond. My ex-wife still had that talent, dropping words like rose petals over landmines. I nodded vaguely, smiled. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes either. The back of my neck prickled. It wasn't the heat. It was that sensation you get when you realize you've been placed into a scene you didn't audition for. Dinner passed in low hums and short bursts of laughter. I watched them talk, passing plates like business cards. I caught Maeve glance at Thatcher twice. He nodded slightly once, as if signaling her next line. After dessert, banana pudding that tasted a bit too sweet for my mood, Thatcher leaned in again. It's not charity, Dad. It's legacy. You'll still be in control. On paper, we just need the liquidity to close escrow on the Durham location. We've already scoped it. Legacy, that word again. Funny how it never came up when I offered to help him with his student loans. I think the brisket's not sitting well, I said, pushing my plate away. I'll clean up later. You all enjoy the evening. Lorna stood but didn't follow me. She never did when it really mattered. That used to bother me. Now it just filled a familiar slot in the evening. Back home, I sat at the kitchen counter. The tiles still had a coffee stain from 2 Thanksgivings ago. I opened the brown passbook. My fingers hesitated on the edge like it might bite. Inside, a processing hold dated March 27th, labeled ACH link. Promise Forward Foundation. That wasn't me. That wasn't anything I'd touched. Promise Forward. I remembered Maeve mentioning something with that name a few months back during a birthday dinner I wasn't fully paying attention to. Something about social good tied to the pizza chain's branding initiative. The total in the passbook blinked up at me, $168, $402.13. The hold was for $25,000. I stood there for a while, thumb tapping the edge of the paper like it was a trigger. Then I closed it slowly. My reflection in the microwave door looked older than I felt. Not sad, just more awake. They wanted a legacy. I hadn't realized mine had already been co-signed. I hadn't touched the Grace Baptist account in months. But someone had. It sat there like a forgotten hymn, quiet and sacred, until the irregularities hummed louder than my old office AC. I found the unopened envelope first. A thank you card from the church board dated 2 weeks prior, thanking me personally for a generous donation. I hadn't given a dime since Christmas. The paper was thick with embossed lettering, and it smelled faintly of old hymnal pages and dust. I stared at it like it had spoken a foreign tongue. That afternoon, the sky over Asheville sulked. Gray clouds hung low, and the window in my office barely caught the dying light. My admin Deb tapped gently on the doorframe. "Just dropping your payroll," she said, but lingered like she wanted to say more. Her eyes flicked to the unopened envelope. "Everything all right, Mr. Weldon?" I nodded too quickly. "Just church business." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. As she left, the copier kicked on across the hall, clunky and tired, like everything else in this building. I pulled up my digital records, the ones I'd been keeping since Maeve first floated the idea of helping Thatcher with structure. My own scan of the Grace Baptist account from February showed a clean zeroed history. Today's version didn't. 3 deposits, 2 withdrawals, 1 account name I'd never seen before, T. Pryor Holdings. A chill ran down the back of my neck. The font on the signature line looked smudged. Mine had always ended with a flat, clean N. This had a trailing loop, sloppy, arrogant. I printed everything. The office smelled of toner and the faint bitterness of stale coffee. As the pages spat out, I stapled them with slow deliberation. Each paperclip clack sounded louder in the silence. Deb popped her head back in. "Weird question," she said. "Was that Maeve at the church last Thursday? I swear I saw her coming out with a manila folder." I didn't answer right away. My thumb paused over a paper edge. "Maybe I said," then turned back to the printer. She watched me for a second. "She's very organized, that one. A little intense." After she left, I reopened the file directory on my desktop. Draft to final trust fund.ssls had been modified that morning. I clicked into the spreadsheet. The cells glowed under the flickering fluorescent. The formatting was neat, surgical, dates aligned, account codes tucked away in hidden columns. Whoever did this had practiced. That night I skipped dinner. Instead, I sat in my recliner with the folder in my lap and the passbook on the table beside me. My father's handwriting was still in the back, black ink from a fountain pen he'd refused to part with. That account wasn't supposed to be touched. Not by me, not by anyone. A text buzzed on my phone. From Thatcher. "Just checking in. Let me know what you think." I stared at it for a long time before replying. If I were to help, where should I send the funds? No emoji. No dad. Just a test. The response came quicker than I expected. "Direct wire to T. Pryor Holdings. I'll send routing info." I read it twice, then a third time. I whispered aloud just to hear it. "They really think I won't notice." My finger hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. Not yet. Outside, the wind picked up, sending dogwood petals skittering down the sidewalk like little warnings. I stood slowly, joints stiff, knees aching. I walked over to the cabinet where I kept old tax returns and pulled the 2019 file. On the back page in a margin, I'd scribbled a name and number just in case. It belonged to a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. Mallory Burns, CPA, and my former ethics instructor. Somewhere between the 7th and 8th step of the staircase, I paused. The stairs creaked like they were remembering something for me. "Don't confuse forgiveness with access," Edmund Clay said, stirring his coffee with the same slow deliberation he once used to sign million-dollar transfers. The spoon clinked against the mug, sharp and rhythmic, like punctuation in a sermon he'd preached 1,000 times before. The Jubilee Cafe hadn't changed since the last time I stepped through its screen door, a place where the varnish smelled older than the staff, and the scent of bacon grease had permanently lodged itself in the floorboards. Outside, the lake steamed gently under a blanket of morning fog. It was the kind of hush that invited reflection, or confession. Edmund looked smaller than I remembered, but no less formidable. Age had only sharpened his features, drawn his temples in, and left his voice a little lower, like gravel smoothed by time. He wore a navy sport coat over a charcoal sweater, and his fingers, thick with arthritis, still moved with precision. "You didn't call me just for memories," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "It's Thatcher," he smiled thin. I thought so. What did he take? I hadn't even said the word steal yet. I told him about the Grace Baptist donation, about the account, about Maeve, the printouts, the Too Smooth Trust Fund Excel file. I didn't mention the text reply. Somehow that felt more personal than fraud. Edmund sipped his coffee, bitter and black. "My godson forged my signature in 2008, he said. "Used my name for a business loan in Tennessee. When it defaulted, I didn't lose money. I lost the right to trust him." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and slid an envelope across the table. Cream-colored, sealed with a faded logo. The corner had curled up in the humidity. From a church staffer, anonymous, but not untrue. I peeled it open slowly. The wind outside flicked the edge of the page. Inside, the type was neat. It named Thatcher, confirmed he'd used my name to secure $12,000 for missional startup efforts. I read it once, then again, and then my eyes fixed on the bottom where the staffer wrote, "We assume this was authorized by you, Mr. Weldon. We were proud." Proud. My hands didn't shake from rage. They trembled with clarity, like something had finally snapped into place. I folded the letter once, then again, 4 clean corners pressed flat. I tucked it inside my coat pocket like it might vanish if I looked away. Edmund didn't speak for a long moment. He motioned for a refill. Another, he told the waitress, who nodded without writing anything down. Habit, I assumed. This was a place where people returned often enough not to need reminders. I ordered tea, I muttered, glancing down at my untouched cup. The steam had long since drifted into the morning fog. "You won't drink it," he said. "Not today." When the new coffee came, he wrapped both hands around it, like it gave him warmth he no longer expected from people. "You've been rescuing people your whole life," he said. "Time to rescue Weldon." I watched a couple outside load groceries into the back of a Subaru. The lake behind them remained still, like it was holding its breath. I'd spent years pretending I was the calm one. The steady hand, the fixed point in a family that rotated around louder needs. Now I wasn't so sure I'd ever been anything but a spectator with good credit. We didn't shake hands when we stood, didn't hug. He just put on his jacket and said, "If you need me, you'll know how to find me." As I drove home, the fog thinned but didn't lift. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, lined thinner, smaller than I remembered. I didn't look like a man betrayed. I looked like a man waking up. At the next red light, I reached for the folded letter and held it against the steering wheel. The crease down the middle felt sharp, deliberate, like a decision made. And maybe it was dinner smelled of rosemary chicken, fresh-baked rolls, and manipulation. The table gleamed under the soft haze of warm pendant lights, casting amber glows across the faux marble surface. Thatcher's dining room always had this showroom quality lived in, just enough to be convincing styled, just enough to be strategic. Maeve had folded the napkins into triangles, sharp enough to cut through silence, and the polished cutlery reflected every twitch of my expression. Lorna was already seated, swirling her wine with the nonchalance of someone pretending not to be triangulating loyalties. She'd brought a fig salad in a blue ceramic dish and made sure everyone knew. "Family dinners deserve something more than just meat," she said as I arrived, placing it like a peace offering or a bribe. Thatcher greeted me at the door with open arms. "Dad, glad you made it," I nodded, giving him a side hug, more for form than affection. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. Though the truth trailed far behind me in the gravel of the driveway. Maeve kissed me on the cheek with a quickness that suggested strategy more than sentiment. "We really appreciate you being open to talking this through." I noticed a leather portfolio near her wine glass, same texture, different shade than my passbook. Inside were color-coded charts, bullet points printed in bold, sans serif font, and tabs with names like ROI Scenarios and Expansion Plan Q2. She waited until everyone had taken a bite before sliding one folder in front of me. "It's all there," she said smoothly, "in case you want to review everything without pressure." I didn't open it. I simply let my hand rest on top of it, feeling the gloss of the laminate and the faint indentation where her ring had pressed earlier. No pressure, but the weight was real. Thatcher cut into the rosemary chicken and began his speech like a man used to leading meetings. "This isn't just about the pizzeria," he said. "It's about scale, about taking what works and making it work everywhere." I chewed slowly, listening, watching his gestures more than his words. He had picked up the tempo of a TED Talk, palms-out voice rising at the end of each sentence, like questions meant to charm rather than invite critique. Maeve followed with a slideshow on her tablet, walking through legacy tier benefits and preferred investor outcomes. Her tone was soothing, precise, like the guided meditations she sometimes posted online. I wondered if she used the same voice when speaking to the bank. I waited until they were 3 graphs in before placing my brown leather passbook on the table. Closed, silent, but present. Maeve's hand paused on the screen. Lorna cleared her throat delicately. "You always said family matters more than numbers, Weldon." She rearranged her napkin for the 3rd time, smoothing a corner that wasn't wrinkled. I did say that I answered my voice even. Thatcher took that as a green light. "That's why we want you involved, not just as funding, as a partner, someone who's built things before, Who gets it? I glanced at the notepad next to my plate. Wrote just one word: packaging. Their language was sleek, streamlined, but underneath it all, I could feel the tremor of desperation, the kind that wore cologne and smiled too broadly. They spoke of opportunity, of unlocking potential, and early-stage buy-in. I nodded, took a sip of lukewarm tea, let them believe I was swaying, but something inside me was sharpening. When the meal ended and the folder closed, I spoke carefully. You've clearly put in a lot of effort. I began pushing the passbook half an inch forward on the table, which is why I'll need 2 days to go through everything, and if I do help, it'll be under my terms. Maeve held her smile, but her fingers tightened slightly around the base of her wine glass. Thatcher opened his mouth, then shut it again. For once, he didn't have a ready reply. Lorna sipped her wine and said nothing. Dessert was an apple tart with a crust Maeve described as rustic. I took a bite, complimented the cinnamon, then stood. Thank you for dinner. No hugs this time. Just a handshake from Thatcher, too firm, and a clipped drive safe from Maeve. Out in the driveway, the night air held that clean chill only early spring carries. Crisp, with just enough sting to remind you you're still alive. I unlocked the car, dropped my coat in the trunk, and heard it. A soft slide, paper shifting. I pulled back the flap and saw the folder, my folder. The one with Clay's letter, the annotated audit from the church fund, and 3 printed bank statements. All still sealed, all still mine. They hadn't seen them yet, but they would, just not on their terms. I forwarded the email chain to myself twice before opening the last attachment. The office was still dark when I unlocked it, 6:07 a.m. by the clock on the hallway wall, the kind with the sluggish second hand that never quite reached the tick before moving again. Rain peppered the windows in light taps, like someone too polite to knock. I didn't turn on the overheads. Just the desk lamp whose warm yellow glow pooled in a tired circle over my keyboard. The rest of the room sat in quiet shadow. Even the humming copier in the corner seemed to be sleeping off a hangover. I set my thermos down, still sealed. No appetite, no nerves left to settle. When I opened my inbox, the forwarded thread glared at me in bold font. Sent from my personal account to my work email, twice, just in case. As if proof could disappear like mist if I didn't anchor it in enough places. The subject line read, FW Grant Request, Prior Pizza LLC. Inside were 3 emails. The first was from Thatcher, dated 2 months ago, before the brisket, before the pitch. He thanked Pastor Florence for believing in young entrepreneurs of faith and outlined how a $15,000 community startup fund would change lives. The tone was hopeful, earnest, familiar. The second was from Maeve, attaching a form labeled Startup Support Application, Religious Institutions Tier B. In the form's authorized signatory line, my name appeared in bold, and under it, my signature, except I never signed it. The third email, the one I had hesitated to open, was a reply from Pastor Florence. So glad to see Weldon's heart still in the right place, it read. We'll expedite the transfer by Friday. I stared at that sentence. It sat there smug and sincere, a bullet wrapped in a hymn. I clicked the PDF attachment again this time, zooming in on the bottom right corner. The signature was too perfect. No hesitation, no smudge. I recognized the curve of the W, the swoop of the P. The same strokes I'd used on an HR document last year when updating my benefits. Someone had lifted it, copied it, planted it. Clay's words came back to me. The truth isn't loud, but it stacks. And stack it did. Click, I hit print. The printer groaned awake like a reluctant witness and spat out page after page emails, form scans. I arranged them in order-stapled sections, cross-checked signatures, then slipped everything into the same long envelope where Clay's letter and the church fund records had waited all week. The folder barely closed now. The weight of evidence was literal. My hand hovered over the copier for a final backup set. I pressed start. It jammed. Page 6 scrunched halfway through the feed tray. The machine beeped, blinking red like it was offended. I yanked open the cover and tugged the paper. It tore. I slammed the lid shut harder than I meant to, then kicked the tray. A hollow thunk echoed down the empty hall. It was the first time I'd raised my voice body or otherwise in months. I sat back in the chair, breathing through my nose, not trusting my throat. Outside, the rain had shifted from taps to rivulets, tracing long streaks down the glass. My phone buzzed. A single text. From Maeve. "Hey, can we talk tonight? Just you and me. Not Thatcher." I stared at the screen. The dots danced, then vanished. I didn't type anything back. Not yet. The coffee mug cracked in two, not from heat, but how I held it. It was one of those old handmade kinds, the kind my mother used to buy from roadside fairs, thick ceramic muted blue glaze. A thumb-sized groove on the handle like it was made for me alone. I'd had it for 20 years. Maybe longer. It never cracked in the dishwasher, never chipped when I dropped it on linoleum. But tonight it gave in silently from pressure I didn't realize I was applying. Maeve sat across from me in my living room. Legs crossed neatly, her coat draped over the armrest like it belonged. She didn't take it off. "I know this is hard to understand," she began, voice measured like a practiced speech. "But Thatcher and we didn't think it'd hurt you. You weren't spending the money, it was sitting there." The lamplight caught the side of her cheekbone. Immaculate makeup, unreadable expression. I didn't respond right away. I raised the mug to my lips, took one sip. Bitter, lukewarm. "You forged my name," I said evenly. "For startup capital, for a dream I wasn't part of." She looked down at her hands, folded tightly. "We thought we were building something real," she said, a touch of something cracking through. "Not stealing, it was misguided, yes. But it was meant to be temporary. We meant to tell you after the second store opened. Once there was proof." The mug cracked then, no shatter, just a sharp click like a bone giving out. A hairline split that turned into a fault line. The handle slid slightly. I caught the base with both hands and placed it down on the coffee table. The brown liquid inside tilted slightly, catching the lamplight, casting a thin shadow like a tide receding. "You know," I said quietly, "Mom once told me people don't betray you. They just reveal they were never on your side." Maeve's jaw clenched. "That's not fair." I leaned back. Neither was the forged grant form, or lifting my signature from a tax document. She stood suddenly. "Thatcher believed in you. He thought you'd be proud if you saw the vision. I told him we should have asked first. But he kept saying, 'Dad's too cautious. Dad needs a push.'" I nodded once slowly. He wasn't wrong. She paused. Looked like she might cry, but didn't. "I didn't want this to be how we talk," she whispered. "No one ever does," I said. There was a moment, brief, fragile, where I wondered if she'd apologize. Not the word, the real thing. A moment of surrender, of real ownership, but it passed. She reached for her coat. At the door, hand on the knob, she turned slightly. "You used to believe in second chances," she said. "You taught Thatcher that." I looked down at the mug. The crack had widened. A slow trail of coffee darkened the grain in the wood beneath it. "I'm not your co-signer," I said. "I'm your warning label." Maeve blinked once, then left. No door slam, just the sound of steps fading down the walkway, then the soft hum of her car pulling away. I sat in silence for a long time. The house smelled faintly of dust and old furniture polish. Outside, the wind rattled the porch chimes, but the sound barely reached me. Eventually, I stood and crossed the room to the hall closet, moved the coats aside, pulled down the navy duffel bag from the top shelf. It was still zipped, still untouched. I placed it on the couch beside me, let it sit there like a guest I wasn't ready to talk to. Then I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark. At 7:12 a.m., I clicked transfer all and it was done. No fanfare, no confirmation chime, just the quiet flicker of the screen as it refreshed, now showing a zero balance and a tiny green check mark in the corner. My account closed. The bank branch smelled of printer toner and those sterile citrus wipes they use on counters. Miriam, the teller, didn't ask questions, just glanced once at the large withdrawal form I'd already signed in duplicate. Her eyebrows lifted slightly when she read the instructions on the bottom line. "Escrow to Grace Baptist," she asked, and Pack Memorial Library. I nodded. She paused, then offered a small smile. One of those hesitant ones people give when they sense something bigger moving under the surface. I'll process this now, Mr. Pryor. She tapped keys, the plastic buttons clicking faintly. I watched her work while the overhead lights hummed. A man in the next cubicle was opening a joint account with his daughter, young, maybe college age. She giggled at something he said. I couldn't hear it, but I saw her lean in and grab his arm playfully. When Miriam handed me the final printouts, I folded them once and tucked them into the brown envelope. On top of the stack, I had written in pen, account closed. Redemption denied. WP. That envelope wasn't for the bank. It was addressed to Thatcher. No note, no postscript. Just a clean, sharp ending. I would mail it after breakfast. The sky outside was pale overcast. The kind of morning that doesn't belong to any season. Just gray. I walked the 2 blocks to the Asheville station coat, zipped hands deep in my pockets. The wheels on my old duffel bag clicked softly against the uneven pavement. I'd packed light, just enough for a few weeks, maybe more. 1 coat, 3 shirts, a paperback, a photo of my mother in her rose garden. At the ticket counter, I didn't ask for anything specific. I just said west. First bus heading west. The clerk tapped at his screen, then said Knoxville. Leaves in 22 minutes. That would do. I bought the ticket in cash. Handed my phone across the counter next. I don't need this anymore, I said. The clerk blinked. We can't really take. Could you just recycle it? He nodded slowly, slid it off the counter into a drawer marked electronic disposal. I boarded the bus near the rear window, where the glass was slightly warped from years of sunlight. The fabric seats had those same wild neon squiggles from 20 years ago. I found that oddly comforting. Settled in, pressed my forehead briefly against the glass, felt its morning chill. The bus hissed and nudged forward. I didn't look back. I opened the paperback. Something old, a used copy of Dandelion Wine I'd bought the week before, but never read. By the 4th page, I'd underlined a line in pencil. It was a June morning when he discovered he was alive. I smiled, folded the corner gently. The ride was quiet. The engine hummed like a lullaby. I ate a pack of trail mix from my coat pocket. Watched towns drift by like old photographs, one faded billboard, one rusted swing set at a time. Somewhere outside Newport, I caught my reflection in the glass. For the first time in months, maybe years, the face looking back didn't flinch. There was no one else's face beside it. No Maeve, no Thatcher, no echoes of Lorna's sighs or Clay's warnings. Just me. A teenage girl across the aisle looked over. You want the window shade down? She asked, polite, tapping the vinyl pull string with one painted fingernail. I shook my head. My voice felt new. No, I said. I want to see what's coming. It's not that I vanished. It's that no one really looked. The whiteboard back in Asheville still held my final message, just 4 words, a period, and my initial went fishing. W. I imagined the silence that settled in that kitchen once someone noticed. Not panic. Just the hollow pause of realization that whatever thread had been tying us together had come quietly undone. Here in this small town tucked between cliffs and seagrass, people don't ask where you came from. They just ask how long you plan to stay and whether you like chowder. I'd been here just shy of 3 weeks. Autumn had brushed the leaves gold and sent the fog ashore most mornings like a ritual. Salt stuck to the windows and the cafes opened late. Everything moved as if it had agreed to give up on urgency. The library, though still half covered in scaffolding, had a charm I couldn't resist. Someone had donated to restore the roof. Local Angel, the librarian called them. I smiled but didn't correct her. I showed up one afternoon just to browse the town's archives and found a shelf labeled MISC, 1980s, 1999, dust thick enough to write a novel in. I offered to help inventory it. Are you retired? The librarian asked, pen tucked behind her ear. Not sure, I said. I just stopped showing up to what used to be. She laughed softly, gave me a clipboard and a smile with no strings attached. Each box I opened held old newsletters, black and white photos, faded notes from garden clubs, and defunct chess leagues. It felt like tending to the memory of a place, not as a resident, but as a witness. I liked that role. One evening while labeling a folder titled Mariners Fest, 1993, my phone now prepaid number unlisted buzzed once and went still. I hadn't given it to anyone but the town library and the gas station clerk. I checked the voicemail later, walking home by the dunes. It was Pastor Florence's voice. Weldon, I don't know where you are. I just wanted you to know, no blame, just prayers. The roof is nearly done. The kids love the new shelves. If you hear this, thank you. That was it. I didn't call back. 2 days later, I opened my P.O. box and found a postcard, blank on the front except for a black and white photo of a long country road. On the back, 4 words in a handwriting I recognized. Understood. Will stop. M. No address, no plea, no guilt. I placed it gently between the pages of my paperback and kept sorting history. At the community potluck that Sunday, I brought a batch of cornbread I'd overbaked by 15 minutes. No one seemed to mind. An older man played folk songs on a dulcimer, while 2 girls passed around slices of pumpkin pie. I stood near the back, sipping cider, content to disappear into the fringe of someone else's story. A young girl tugged on my sleeve. She held a paperback I vaguely remembered seeing on the library cart, Charlotte's Web, its spine taped in 3 places. Are you the man who fixed the reading nook? I hesitated. I helped clean it up. She beamed. It's nice. Feels like it listens. I smiled, nodded once. It's just space, I said. What you fill it with, that's yours. She ran off before I could ask her name. The walk home took 15 minutes through streets dimly lit by porch lights and the occasional pumpkin display. The sea was louder that night, no wind, just the constant hush and roar like an old friend clearing their throat. Inside my rental cottage, I slipped off my shoes, placed the day's library receipts in a drawer labeled Here, and filled the kettle. The mug on the counter was new, sturdy, simple blue glazed ceramic from a local market. I poured the hot water slowly, watched the steam rise. It didn't crack. I sat by the window, both hands wrapped around the mug. The smell of chamomile, the moon above the bay, no shadows behind me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel vanished. I felt free. The mug stays warm longer these days. Maybe because my hands have stopped shaking, or maybe because I finally chose something built to last. Out here with salt in the air and a town that never asked for my backstory, I learned that peace isn't a place, it's a choice we stop postponing. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who taught you where your boundaries should begin. And sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom in motion. So if you've ever been the one who kept giving, kept forgiving, tell me this. When did you finally choose yourself?